Hello, and thank you for joining us at this year's Chattanooga Film Festival. My name is Dustin Kramer, and today I'm speaking with the producer, writer, director, and star of The Aftermath from 1982 and Empire of the Dark from 1990, Mr. Steve Barkett. Also joining us is the co-star of both The Aftermath and Empire of the Dark, Mr. Christopher Barkett. Welcome, gentlemen, and thank you so much for taking the time to chat with us this year.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
To be here.
So, just to start us off, Steve, what got you into the movie business before making your first feature? And sort of jumping off of that, how did The Aftermath come about?
Well, I'll try and give you the Reader's Digest version. I was working with film even before I came to California. I collected movies. I had film series at the Art Center in Oklahoma, where I come from. And I just loved movies. I loved them. And I knew that was what I was going to do if I could accomplish it. And a lot of people think Aftermath was my first film. I was actually in Hollywood 10 years before I made The Aftermath. And I made 7 or 8 other films first. Not big things, but I starred in a movie. I was only there 2 months, and I got a lead in a terrible film that I don't think was released very widely called The Egyptians Are Coming. It was a comedy that they had ultimately an Arab editor. I'm Arab, so I can say this. And he was offended by the jokes, and he cut them all out, and that's all that movie had. but yeah.
Well, it did have Ushi Daigar, though.
It had Ushi Daigar, was something for sure. But Aftermath was originally written as a story between Stan Livingston, who was Chip on My Three Sons, and myself. Stan was my first friend in the Hollywood area. I rented an apartment, and his apartment was right across from mine. Literally, you open my door up, you could walk into his door. And we became good, fast, and close friends. And we did the first draft of the script in 1972, and it was quite different from the one I shot finally. We were school teachers, we weren't astronauts, and we were on an island when the nuclear war came. We didn't even know about it, and we see a boat floating, and that's kind of the scene of the corpses on the beach in a floating boat, and lots of similarities, but not the same thing. And we had a couple of false starts where we thought we were going to be able to do the movie, and we couldn't. And originally I was planning it for a really cheap movie, like $40,000. Ultimately, we ended up spending about $250,000 on it. And what helped tremendously was when we did the post-production, we did it at Warner Brothers. Our music mixer was Gene Garvin, who I think won an Academy Award for the George Powell War of the Worlds, and Joseph Erickson. I'm sorry, not Erickson. Von Stroheim, Joe von Stroheim. It's been so many years, guys. Was in charge of the mixing in the mechanics area, I wanted to make a film that I felt would show off the things I could already do very well. I was quite acrobatic in my younger days, and I'd taken martial arts when I was younger, so I knew how to make a fight scene look good, and I wanted to do something with my son. And if I had actually done the movie when I first thought about it, he was way too young to do that. I didn't think he was then, but he was. And so when we finally did make the film about 7 years later, he was just the right age. And I wanted, it was from the beginning, he was going to be in it, and it's something I wanted to do with him. But it wasn't nepotism. This was why I created it. I wanted to make a film that had my philosophy, that could show me off well in terms of the physical things I could do in a movie, and that I could shoot within a reasonable budget and still have things that were impressive. And we just kept building on it when I finally got to shoot it. And I'll tell you something about that later. But Chris?
I can remember I was in the 4th grade when we started shooting Aftermath. So I went out during the summer of maybe between 3rd and 4th grade. I lose track. Certainly my experience was not what yours was. It was I didn't have any of the headaches or the worries or concerns. I was able just to run around this pretend world, and I especially love the rocket ship scenes. The sets were fantastic. I remember in between takes, I used to go over and play on it. There were all sorts of great buttons, and in fact, I can remember specifically one of the there's a scene in Star Wars where it's after Luke and Han and Leia escape the Death Star, and the Falcon is being chased by the 4 TIE fighters, and it's kind of a checkerboard targeting system, if you will. I want to say it was Pat McClung. I could be wrong, but I want to say Pat had brought that cell.
No, it's Bob Skoczak.
Oh, it's Bob. Okay, so whoever brought the cell and put it in the ship, and I remember that when you moved the light behind it, it would change the perspective of just like what you saw in Star Wars. I thought that was really cool because a big Star Wars fan, and I nerded out on all that kind of stuff. So the things that kind of stand out for me was the cool miniatures, the sets. I loved the monsters and the mutants, and it was really, for me, it was kind of the genesis of my interest in models and model making. And even though I thought I wanted to be an actor, I didn't really ever put enough time in it to be good at it. I think I could be a good actor, but it's a little late. I've moved on. But I still make models, and I can remember the very first model I made was of the Starship Enterprise from the original series, and it looked like complete shit. But it was my first, and while we were making the act, I did make a couple telephone poles for some of the Detroit city scenes. I don't know, I can't remember if they were used, honestly.
They were.
But I do remember there was a couple of things I did that you allowed me to do on the rocket ship interior and so forth. But for me, it was really neat. Now, of course, the Skotaks weren't really the Skotaks at the time. They were just a couple of guys making models and sets. But it was really fun to kind of watch how they worked, and I was really too young to understand what the gravity of what I was involved in. But nevertheless, I still got a lot out of it, and a lot of fun. Certainly an experience that none of my peers had at the time. That's for sure.
Almost definitely. So I wanted to talk about the cast a little bit. The cast of The Aftermath includes the legendary Sid Haig, Forrest J. Ackerman, and even Lynn Margulies, who's probably best known as Andy Kaufman's partner in the last few years of his life. Can you talk about assembling such a unique cast and what it was like to work with what I assume were very, very disparate personalities? They seem like they would be, at least.
That's for sure. That's for sure. Well, Sid Haig was in a number of films John Ashley made. John Ashley was a very close friend of mine. And I asked John how he did, and did he think he would accept the pittance of an offer I was going to offer him. And he said, I think he would, but it depends on whether he likes the idea. So I met at a restaurant with Sid, and I think, I probably shouldn't even say this, but I think I only paid him $500 for 1 week. And he was very helpful. In fact, in my death scene with Chris, he's holding the boom for us because we were out in the middle of the desert and we had a skeleton crew that day. Mm-hmm. But Sid was a wonderful actor. He seemed to enjoy doing it. I'm not sure he ever even saw the film because Sid was like Dick Miller, who also did a voiceover in the film. Neither one of them seemed to care much for a movie and made it. They're not like we are, where we want to see movies we like over and over again. Mm-hmm. They see it once and they say, oh, I saw that picture. That's just how it is. So I don't know if he ever saw the final of it, but when I got together with Sid just about 8 or 9 weeks before he died at the Vincent Price Awards, I gave him a beautiful Blu-ray copy. And whether he actually ever got to see it or not, I'm not sure. But he was a good guy. He loved acting. And, he waited a long time to get the notoriety he got that brought him up to being one of the 5,000 top people on the Internet Movie Database. Mm-hmm. But he deserved it. He was a good guy. Lynn, it was actually my girlfriend for many years, and she was not an actress in any way, shape, or form, but I thought she did a credible job, and it didn't require a lot of performing. And the way I made this film, Sid and even Lynn are in it far less than you would imagine if you took all those scenes out and put them end to end. And we made Cutter kind of a presence because we were always talking about him or talking about what was going on. Chris, did you want to say something about some of the?
Well, I'll touch on Forey. Forey Ackerman, the editor and publisher of famous Monsters magazine, who some of you may be familiar with, inspired lots of great actors and directors: Spielberg, Lucas, Stephen King, etc. Originally, I think Dad was going to. Originally, Dad was going to use Buster Crabbe. Wanted to use Buster Crabbe. I'll put this over to Dad.
But I just couldn't get him to come out.
well, you did talk to him about it, as I recall, right?
Well, more than talk to him, he flew out and saw some pieces of the film. He was doing a book, and I spent 2 or 3 days with him showing him clips. He decided he wanted to do it, but he said it's going to have to fit in with my schedule, meaning his schedule. And what happened was you nearly failed school that year because I hung on to you so late trying to be available for him. And finally, I thought, I got to get somebody else. I also talked to Ray Bradbury about doing it. And he said he at the time, I think he was doing the stage version of Martian Chronicles. He couldn't do it, but he said he would have otherwise. So Forey I thought, well, Forey had a real giant influence on me like so many others. And we knew each other pretty well. And I run it past him, but I told him, I said, listen, this is not a cameo. This is a real part. And it's several pages of dialogue, and it has to be memorized, and it has to be good. And I want you I'm not going to say I think it's good or bad. If you say you think you can do it, we'll shoot it. And we did, and he did great. And incidentally, the night he came, we shot that. Darlene O'Brien, the widow of Willis O'Brien, came with him and watched us shooting it. It was because, of course, King Kong is really still, even at this age, my favorite movie. And it was a real thrill to be able to talk to her in between scenes. I didn't know if you knew that at the time. I know I've said it since.
I do remember when you mentioned it. I had forgotten. You would think that I would have remembered that, but I had forgotten about her having been there. That's really pretty cool. But Forey was, an odd cat. He was always seemed to always be jovial and very childlike, and not in a immature, weird way, but just kind of a fun. Whimsical way, if you will, and his place was just fantastic. I don't want to get off on a tangent here, but having interest in memorabilia, film memorabilia, and models and miniatures and so forth. At the time that I first met Corey, I wasn't aware that he had all these great props and things from the original Kong and so many Harryhausen miniatures. He had the Lon Chaney makeup kit. I remember going and seeing a mask from Creature from the Black Lagoon. And so anyway, the point is, a guy had a fantastic collection of film memorabilia. Not to mention, just paper, posters, books. Unbelievable collection of stuff. And really interesting guy, very warm and friendly. We stayed in touch. I had a few letters he sent me as a kid. He used to call me, you say, quite a little man there. He would say, pat me on the head, quite a little man there. And anyway, really neat guy. We were mentioning Sid earlier. My interaction with Sid was somewhat limited. I didn't have a whole lot, but the times that I was able to speak with him and talk with him. I had no idea who he was or what he did. He was just a kind of a giant man to me, but really nice, a lot of fun to be around. And he was intimidating. When I watched him act, Cutter was not a nice guy, and he really I thought he did a really great job of portraying him. As little screen time as he had in the film, the presence of that character was the character was ever present. The ominous part of that character.
And you get the honors of delivering the final blow to him.
Yeah, spoiler alert. I know if you guys haven't seen it, it's only been out since '82.
Right. I think there's been enough time.
Right. Yeah, that was neat. So every now and again, I'll see somebody who likes film and knows who Sid is, and I'll say, I killed him in a movie once.
Well, when I was 10.
Right.
One thing that I love about this film, just as a fan of it, is how you blend genres. So the movie starts with that great little space sequence, and the sets look like something out of like a classic drive-in feature from the 50s or something like that, or early 60s, you know, that classic era, Silver Age era of science fiction adventure movies. And then once our main character Newman arrives on Earth, what we see is more akin to like Mad Max, with sort of an exploration of the darker side of human nature, like sort of like a Romero flick. It reminded me of like The Crazies, or, you know, the original Night of the Living Dead or something. So can you talk about like your creative process, Steve, and your goals in what making what feels simultaneously like old Hollywood formalism and yet still very contemporary for 1982, of course.
Sure. Well, it but that's what I wanted. I wasn't sure it was going to play. I think it did. A lot of people have said how it reminds them of the films from the golden age of Hollywood, like Steve Latchdaw, who I worked with, and he just loves the films. In fact, one of the best things ever written about the movies he wrote. But I played it by ear, and I've got to tell you, the script to Aftermath, and Chris and I were just discussing this a few weeks ago. I remade that film in the cutting room. I was not an experienced feature director when I made that film, and I had lots of little scenes that were good, and some of them weren't in the right place. They needed to be moved. And I looked at it when it was finished, because I had so much time watching films, presenting films as a curator, so to speak, at the art museum. I realized I could make it work totally, but I had to make sure there's something in every reel that kept people's attention, and yet still pushed the story forward. And that wasn't easy. There were a couple of spots in there that I was worried it might lose people, because it was duller than the rest of the film. It wasn't dull, but I'm just saying it was slower than the rest of the film.
In comparison too, yeah.
But as I said earlier, I wanted to make a film that had my own personal philosophies about the things that Chris encapsulates in his speech at the end of the movie. You know, love, honor, and justice. Being able to stand up to something that might kill you, you know, and having the courage in spite of that. And I felt that people would watch the Aftermath and say everybody could be a hero if they're just willing to put their life on the line and risk it. But I think what happened, a lot of people couldn't identify with it, because there was a kind of nihilistic quality about it that scared most people. I mean, they wouldn't want to have been like that. And that I didn't count on. But we had, most of our screenings were really good. We had a terrible screening with the, what was that society called? Science Fiction Academy or something.
Yeah, something like that.
Chad used to do the award ceremonies. Anyway, they wanted to put it in as nominated as the best picture, and they were terrible. And it happened like just about a week or two after my mother died. Oh, it was really hard to keep my cool about it. But we've had dozens of screenings at Warner Brothers and at MGM and at different places to get real, cards from people who didn't know me to see what they thought. And it's always had successful screenings. And the last 35 screening was in England when I got my Life Achievement Award from the Society of Fantastic Films. And they loved it. I mean, they took it exactly the way I meant it. And at that time, the film was like almost 20 years old. And so you can't always judge how a movie's going to play, because a lot of people may not realize this or even think about it. But the only person who can never look at the movie the way the audience does totally is the guy who created it and wrote it and directed it and is in it. Because they know all the high points and low points. They know how it ends and so forth. So to try and sit in that chair as an audience who's seeing this for the first time is not an easy thing to do. And I think that the ending caught a lot of people off guard when I said that Cutter had escaped, and of all of them, he was the guiltiest. But that's what I was trying for. I was trying for a timeless thing. And there were a few little things that gave us away. And of course, now you've had so many things that didn't exist then, cell phones and even the internet and so forth. We talk about computers, but we don't really go into great detail about what they did when they existed, because they don't exist anymore. And that was kind of our saving grace in the film. And having one person the narrative. It's first-person narrative carrying the story, and then at some point that changes to third-person narrative, and then it becomes Chris's first-person narrative. And I didn't know if that was going to work either, but I've never heard anybody complain about it, and I think it did work. And the idea is that out of all these people who are fighting these evil men, the person that actually ends up stopping them is a little kid who is just willing to try.
Yep. I think that there's room for a sequel there too. So if you're willing to do one more, Chris, if you're up for it, Aftermath 2.
A sequel had been written and is written and is in script form, but we don't talk about it. But I do remember it was a really cool read. It just kind of, it takes place years after the incidents in the aftermath, and the boy is now grown, and but it's a lot lighter film. It's a neat little movie. Or rather, it's a neat little script. I haven't read it in a long time, but I remember when I read it, really thinking it was neat.
The problem for me is, and one of the reasons I decided to stop making movies when in 1998, and I went overseas as an executive in international television, worked in London and Paris and Cairo, and I lived in Rome, and I just decided I can't make movies the way I like them because the audience is just so different, and it was very frustrating. Took a long time to find the right audience for Aftermath in 1980. Everything had changed, and I guess I was just foolish to think that everybody loved these old movies the way I did, and there would be an audience for it. But clearly, it was a specialized audience. Some of the people loved it, took it seriously. Some people, it was just another movie showing a lot of heads being blown off. That's certainly not what I wanted to make. That's not how I wanted it to be remembered. And I'm happy to say it looks like that's not going to be the way it's remembered.
Yes, I would agree.
It's resonating, and a whole new audience is seeing it, and that makes me very happy.
And we're happy to present it here at Chattanooga Film Festival.
Yeah.
Its reputation precedes it, and I think that there's good reason to get as many new eyes on it, especially an audience like ours that I know will appreciate it. And so let's jump into Empire of the Dark. Can you talk about the process and challenges of getting that second feature made? You mentioned that it had a much higher budget. So was this an easier road, or how did that go?
Well, in some ways it was easier, but it was kind of a foolish road too. I'll explain that as we go along here. After I made the Aftermath, that the house you see and the grounds with the pond and all that stuff, it was my home for 20 years. That's a house I bought with my profits from Aftermath, and I lived up there, and it was such a picturesque place. I thought I'd really like to do a film up here someday. And there'd been some local legends about sacrifices, 100, 200 years ago in some of the lava caves and stuff. And that made me think of it. That's why I kind of came up with that idea. But I had met Fred Olen Ray in 1988, and we became close and fast friends. And I thought, well, maybe this is the time to do another film. And my partner, who was a very dear friend and also happened to be my brother-in-law at the time, he died in way too young at age 57 in 1998. I was going overseas to work with him, and 2 days after I got there, he had a heart attack and died. But he was a great guy, and the money was given to me on a handshake. And even though we had a corporation and he owned stock in it, there was never a written agreement between us. So I was going to make 3 small pictures for about $300,000, $250,000 each, because I thought I'll try and do this stuff that's still something that will please me, but that will appeal more to the kind of audience Fred has been making his films for. But as usual, as things started rolling, I just kept building and thinking, well, I could do this, and then we could do that, and and basically you start out to build a one-room house, and suddenly you realize you're building a hotel, so it probably was not a wise thing to do, because when the movie finally was completed, and it took the shooting was very much unlike the Aftermath. The Aftermath was shot sporadically, and I would go back and shoot. until I was happy. But Empire was shot in 22 days, the principal photography. And that was like 10 or 11 days up north where my house was in Hat Creek, and then another 10 or 11 on the stage down in
Burbank.
yeah, it was in Burbank. So, but the special effects stuff that I was in, and I really couldn't have put anybody else in that movie if I'd wanted to. I couldn't afford to pay them to come back and do all these extra shots over a period of a year and a half. But that's how I did it. And we didn't intend to spend that much money. We just, as when things looked good, and we went ahead. But the problem with that movie is it came out just at the time all the digital effects were becoming the rage. And that's what everybody wanted, including all the main distributors. And the stuff was done the old-fashioned way, the miniatures and the glass shots and so forth, the way, Ray Harryhausen would have done them for his pictures even 20 years ago, 20 years before that, I should say. So it was not a good judgment. And I went on to make a number of other pictures after that, either as an actor or working with visual effects or whatever. But I was just disappointed, not so much in the movie, but I was disappointed that I hadn't seen clear what was happening while I was making it in the industry. And I didn't. I was just concentrating on the film, and I lived in my own world, and it was a mistake, financially a mistake. But it's so interesting that in the last year or two, it's really become a film of interest. We've had some screenings in retro theaters, and if the pandemic hadn't come, we probably would have had a lot more, and we probably will have more. But that's in a nutshell kind of what happened with that, and why we went overboard. I would have liked to have made more films, but after I made that, and it had such a slow build to the success it's enjoying, it kind of made me think maybe I just shouldn't have made it, and maybe I shouldn't make any more because the audience wasn't there, And there is suddenly an audience there, which surprises me even more about a picture that age. I saw it's 30 years old.
Mm-hmm. I was going to say, if I may, even though Empire was made in '90, it feels like an '80s movie to me.
Absolutely.
Like
I agree.
Or movie, and it looks like it, in a lot of ways too. As Dad mentioned, the practical effects and matte shots, glass shots, and so forth. Even some rear screen stuff, which even predates the '80s. But part of that was based on necessity, budget and so forth. Part of it was style, and for me, one of the things that I kind of felt like with Empire was that when we were done with it, I remember when we had that. Let me rephrase this. When we released Empire on Laserdisc, it felt like, DVD was just coming up. So I almost felt like we were always a little behind the curve on Empire.
Yeah, I think so.
And then it for me, I remember the process and how excited I was, and I wasn't disappointed in the film. I just, after it was done, I was disappointed in my performance because I was a little stale. As I mentioned earlier, Dad and I had some, I was 20 and Dad was trying to make a movie, and I was trying to be, my own man. So there was that. So I wasn't as good in the movie as I wanted to be. Now, I was still happy about the effects and some of the other stuff. So I kind of just, I didn't make a big deal about it. Like when I came back to Oklahoma, my close friends knew about it, but I kind of kept it, on the back burner and was hoping that, if it was successful, then great, then, sure, I'll let people know about it. But, I just kind of kept it close to the vest. And then years later, here it is. And now all of my friends know. I mean, everybody that knows me knows, and I get, people will send me pictures, screenshots on TV. Hey, I saw your movie on TV the other day. And anyway, so.
Now you can brag about it. No, you say, hey, I was in this movie.
the thing is, it's for me, it's different. It's my dad's movie. I'm in it. It's not as maybe it's not as polished as a Hollywood movie. So I always kind of was a little embarrassed about how I looked or how this shot didn't quite work out. But I think a lot of people see that. What you and I had this discussion about movies, and a lot of people are able to see the charm in it and the effort. Even though sometimes, things don't turn out quite as well as what you might have hoped for, and whether it's for budget or experience or talent or whatever the case is. Most people that I speak to that see Empire really like it, and we had a screening at the Texas. I hope I'm getting this right. The Texas Theater in Dallas, and they invited me down for that, and man, I did not know what to expect. I'd never seen it with a live audience outside of the people who worked on it and so forth. I half expected to get run out of town, but they were so gracious, and either they were just a really nice crowd or they really liked it. So it's fortunately it has gained some notoriety and popularity, and I'm thankful that even though it's been all these years, that at least now that people are seeing it, and it has some longevity and some life.
I want to say that, like The Aftermath, Empire of the Dark very does feel beholden to those classic filmmaking techniques, like you were talking about, like the matte paintings and things like that. It's very tactile, very grounded. I'm particularly impressed with the puppetry and the stop motion. You talked about King Kong. King Kong has come up a couple of times, and I think that the stop motion is very reminiscent of Willis O'Brien stuff from that. And I think that I'd like to hear a little bit more about the work that went into getting that big demon on screen and seeing it come to life. The work that went into making that come to life.
The model in the model animation it's not great, but it is model animation, so we like it. I am a big fan of the Harryhausen and O'Brien films, so we wanted to have some animation in the movie. That was really the deal, and then of course our monster, we needed to have some sense of scale, and we couldn't obviously we weren't going to build a big practical puppet. We had some smaller puppets that we used for certain shots, but
one of the other demon items we had the head and shoulders, and then we had one of the arms.
Yeah, there was an arm.
Because there's no way, even if we had tried, we could have done animation for all that stuff. So it mixed in with some of the stop motion, but sometimes it doesn't work that great. But it seems to be okay. When you've been running a film for people for 30 years and nobody has said anything bad about that, I guess it's probably okay.
All right.
You look at it every time and go, oh, why did we do this?
We got over that hurdle.
Oh, it's fantastic. I mean, there's just a quality to it, and you even see it in things like RoboCop. Like Verhoeven did that for the Ed 209. That was model animation, stop motion, and it's got that. There's a herky jerkiness to it that you're never going to completely iron out, but it's also a real object, and I believe that the human mind knows. The human mind knows when it's seeing a real object and when it's not, and I think that there's something valuable in that personally.
We had a lot of perspective miniatures, and we had built, I don't know, 3 or 4 large practical cave sets, and then we would have perspective miniatures that we would place close to the camera so we could change it up and make it look like it was different angles of the cave. And Rob Stromberg, Jim Davidson, Rick Hildner, all those guys.
Great.
We spent a lot of time trying to get that stuff to look at, and man, it's. I don't know what to say, man. I thought it looked pretty cool. The cave stuff and the monster, all that stuff is really fun. I mean, most people that I talk to, that the climax of that movie, whatever, it's really long too, by the way. But by the end of it, they're just like, oh my god, So that was the payoff for me. The end scene, and all the great cave stuff. I really liked that.
Well, you got a little bit more makeup and gore gag effects in Empire of the Dark than you do in the Aftermath. Aftermath has that exploding head, which is very impressive, and it's got a couple of other things. The corpses on the beach, which is a very nice. Looked like some kind of like paper composite or something like that, but it was very good effect. But I have to say, I'm curious if it was intentional that you cast Joe Pilato to then rip him in half just like he bites it in Day of the Dead.
I had seen Day of the Dead, but that was not intentional. In fact, it's kind of a funny story how Joe got the part. As Chris said, I had an apartment in Tarzan. I had a cutting room in it and so forth. And one day there was my doorbell rang, and I opened it up, and there was Joe Pilato. I'd never met him. And he said, I saw you were looking for somebody. And he said, I live next door. I thought I'd just bring the picture by.
That was really cool. By the way, I was just like, whoa, it's Pilato is in our living room. I wanted to nerd out and talk, Romero movies with him, but I didn't feel right about it at the time.
The film was originally, the climax was supposed to be between myself and Richard Harrison sword fighting. The first day Richard was there, he bent over to pick something up, pulled a muscle in his back, and he could hardly even stand up straight. And he was like that for the entire shoot. So it became obvious I had to rewrite the ending of the film. So basically, the sword fight you see with Chris and Dan's speaker was kind of the sort of thing that was going to be done with just Richard and I, because Richard was so popular and famous in those films in the '60s. I mean, literally, I had to, off the cuff, just figure out how to redo it so Richard could continue working in the role, and we could complete it. And so a lot of the last parts were improvised. Maybe there was a little bit too much improvised because it's a very long running, and some people probably don't have the stamina for it, but that's how it happened. And in retrospect, and I love Richard Harrison, we're very close friends, but in retrospect, I wish I had Richard play Pilato's part and Pilato play Richard's part, because Pilato in Day of the Dead is terrifying to watch. He is so the epitome of evil.
He's fantastic.
And he was a wonderful actor, and he deserved a better end than he got. He didn't die under very good circumstances. And but I really, really enjoyed working with him. Well, we made him up. The makeup gal made him up to look too old, and that was our longest day. We shot 22 hours. Almost every major dialogue scene, except the ones that were shot up north, was done in that. I think we did 24 pages that day.
Wow.
That was a nightmare. I want to say that was a nightmare. I spent the night at the Burbank studio. This was Dave Stipes and Kim Bailey, and I want to say Tony Dublin all had a effect shop, and we Jim Davidson and I could be getting my days mixed up, but I'm pretty sure that was the night. The previous night we had been trying to get something squared away, some set done, and so we decided to stay the night, and then just got up the next morning, and when everybody started arriving.
Wow,
I think that's right. And another kind of interesting thing about the film is that the sword stuff, I had done a very small part when Fred needed some help one day in his film Wizards of the Demon Sword. And that's how I met Dan Speaker, who had done some of the sword choreography in Spielberg's Peter Pan film. And so we talked, and originally I was going to use different swords like cutlasses, and he talked me into using the broadswords, and I think they were very dramatic and worked out okay, but they're not easy to handle and deal with. And we didn't have any serious injuries, but Chris too got hit by the hand one day when we were working. You want to show the sword?
Yeah, this looks like a great segue.
Absolutely.
Okay, so this is Dad's sword from Empire, and I don't know if I can get in here a little closer. I don't know if you can see all the jagged.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, you can see it.
Where we were really banging swords together. So none of the swords in the film were fake. They were all the real deal.
And here's an interesting side note. I don't think I saw wizard of the Demon Sword until after I'd finished shooting Empire. And then I suddenly realized that in the main title sequence, they're using an identical sword to that in it. And I thought, oh, what the heck?
It's like going to a party and wearing the same thing as somebody else, being like, "Oh, how embarrassing!"
Yeah.
Chris, I understand that you've got some more goodies there. Do you want to show off some?
Yeah. Well, I have this. This is the original painting for hang on, be more specific here. This is the original painting for the poster art from Empire.
Fantastic! I love that. Steve, finally, as an independent filmmaker, you're bound to wear many hats. You talked about all the things that you talked about, even having other people on set, Sid Haig holding the boom for that final scene there in the aftermath, some of which you might not even get credit for, some of those hats. So producing, writing, editing, directing, you've done these on your films. These are skills that are hard enough on their own. But acting in your own movie is another beast entirely. Can you kind of talk to me about the unique challenges of directing a production in which you're also performing specifically as an independent filmmaker who really gets to make their own decisions and with a smaller budget?
Well, I can. And first off, I'll say that while directing yourself, because you have other eyes on the set. People, if something goes really wrong, if you have people and trust, they'll mention it. As an example, when I find Sarah after the cutter's been through with her, I go over and I embrace her lifeless body. And when I came up on the first take, I had foamy blood on my nose in a round circle right there. And it was a great take, but we obviously could not use it. And so that's helpful. But the freedom you feel when you can do both as an actor and a director what you feel is right and not have anybody else say, no, I don't like that, do it this way. That was always hard for me. And that's one of the reasons I probably didn't get hired more, not because I didn't conform to what other directors wanted me to do, but because they were afraid I would be difficult to get to conform, which I wasn't. But and I understood that. Because, when we made Dinosaur Island, I know I'm digressing, there were 6 guys in the film only, and 5 of them were directors.
Right.
Yeah. Ross Hagen, Richard Gabay, myself, and so forth. And it is hard to do. And some people have done it successfully, some people have not. And I think I did it fairly successfully. There is, however, I probably shouldn't even tell you this because everybody will be looking for it. But that long day where we did the 24 pages, there's a scene where we're in Madame Oleska's house. And Bill Stromberg was shooting that. Rob's dad, Bill Stromberg of Crater Lake fame, was shooting that sequence. And when I went, and I did a very complicated scene where, like, we open on a tight shot, it pulls back on a 2 shot, and then it goes to a 3 shot, and it was like about 3 minutes long and had 9 different shots basically in it, and it was going really well. And then at one point, when I'm standing there, I wasn't seeing the dialogue at that point. I believe it was either Jay Richardson or Madame Oleska. I can't remember which. And as I could see out of the corner of my eye something going on that shouldn't be going on by the camera. And I ever so slightly go and I'm looking off the set, but I know I'm not the center of the scene. And then I see it's okay and I go back. And that's the only time I think I ever did that. I probably did it more than once, but I always cut it out. But I couldn't cut it out of this complicated shot. So, sometimes you drop the ball. But I enjoyed directing myself. I really did. And it was a terrific feeling of freedom. But there's a danger there, too, because, people are going to call you an egomaniac. And if you edit it, too, and you wrote it and you're producing it and you worked on the visual effects and, edited the music, recorded the score and so forth. It's so much. But one thing more I wanted to mention about Empire was the original title when we were shooting was The Evil Knight. And I was sharing an office with Fred Ray in Hollywood at the time next to the Hollywood Athletic Club. And one day, Jim Wynorski was up and he was talking to me, and they had seen the rough cut of the film the night before, and he came to me and he said, "Steve," he said, "Evil Knight is not a big enough name for this movie. You need a big name for this movie." And I thought, he's right. And I spent a couple of days kicking it around, and that's when I came up with Empire of the Dark.
And you talking about what kind of a director you are, like, whether or not you're an egomaniac. It's fortunate that we have someone who will be brutally honest about your directing style right here. Chris, what kind of a director is Steve?
I touched on this earlier. I was 20. I hadn't quite. I was just coming into my own. I had a lot of respect for Dad. I mean, I might not have shown as much as I had for him, but I had a lot of respect in that there was so much going on. There's so many things that he was juggling. I just wanted to kind of stay out of the way, make things go smooth, make sure that we were doing what we needed to do to make a movie, because sometimes these things go south. Money runs out, things aren't working out, and then you're stuck with either crap or you wrap. But I was impressed, just at the clip by which we went. Dad's. Some people might say Dad's a little difficult to deal with. I am not one of them.
Steve, I saw you bristle at that.
No, I was going, but no.
Oh,
but Chris, what Chris was referring to, I don't know if you would be upset that.
At this point.
Right. He was mouthing off to me, and I felt it was undermining my authority with the crew. And I warned him 2 or 3 times not to do it, and he did, and he continued. And then, so the next time I said, "You're fired. Here's your ticket. You're going back to Oklahoma." Now, the film was 3/4 completed, but it was a good lesson for Chris, because later, much later, he came up to me and said, "You were right to fire me. It was not right." And but I loved his work. I loved making those pictures with him, but. Unfortunately, he crossed a line that very few have crossed with me and still not walked away with trouble. And that was,
Of course, I am my father's son, so there's that as well. But that wasn't. It wasn't like I was fired and I never came back. I was fired and then I came back and we finished.
Yes, that's right. But I thought
it's not like I was
on you.
That wasn't the end. That wasn't the end of our relationship.
Thank you two so much for being with us here at the Chattanooga Film Festival. We're so happy to be screening The Aftermath and Empire of the Dark. Thank you so much for your time, and we hope to have you back again in the future, and we can talk to you again then.
Well, great. So again, we really appreciate the fact that you guys had us, and it's been a lot of fun. Thanks again.
Yeah, thank you.